She was 63 years old, wearing her dead husband's boots, standing in front of a horse that had thrown every man on the property. And the whole town was watching. Some were laughing. Some were shaking their heads. One man, the kind who always has something to say, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Asterisk, go home, Mirabelle. That horse don't care about your grief. Asterisk. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. She looked at the horse. And what happened next is something the people of Calverton, Tennessee still talk about, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And truth has a way of outlasting everything else. Before we get into this story, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Have you ever been in a room, or a moment, or a season of your life, where everyone around you had already decided what you were capable of, where the verdict was in before you even opened your mouth? Because that's exactly where Mirabelle Oakes found herself. 63. A widow, standing in the dirt with borrowed boots and a broken heart. And somehow, that horse became the thing that changed everything. Leave a comment below with your city and tell me, has anyone ever underestimated you so badly it actually set you free? I want to read every single one of those. And if this kind of story speaks to you, the quiet kind of courage, the slow kind of strength, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Now, let's go back to Calverton. The Oakes family had worked the same land in Calverton for 4 generations. 312 acres of rolling Tennessee hillside, split between cattle pasture and hay fields and one creek that flooded every March without fail. It wasn't a wealthy spread, but it was a real one, the kind of place where the land itself seemed to hold memory. Mirabelle had married into it at 24. She'd grown up in Knoxville, the daughter of a pharmacist, and everyone in Calverton had opinions about what a city girl knew about farming. Not much, they assumed. And for the first few years, they weren't entirely wrong. But she learned. She learned because her husband, Doyle, was patient with her in the specific way that good men are patient, not condescending, not performative, but genuinely willing to stand beside someone while they figure things out. He taught her the land the way his father had taught him, row by row, season by season. They had 2 sons, Truett and Bodie, both of whom grew up on that land and then, the way grown children often do, found reasons to move away from it. Truett was in Memphis now, managing a logistics company. Bodie had gone further, Portland, Oregon, and rarely called. That wasn't a tragedy. It was just life. The land had shaped them, and they had moved on from it. Mirabelle understood. What she hadn't understood, until she was forced to, was how much of her identity had been built around Doyle. He died on a Tuesday in late October, 3 years ago. Heart attack. He was out in the south field checking a fence line, and he just went down. The paramedics said he was likely gone before he hit the ground. That was supposed to be a comfort. Mirabelle had nodded when they told her, and then she had gone inside and sat at the kitchen table for 6 hours without moving. The grief came in waves, as people said it would. What no one told her, or what she hadn't heard when they did, was that grief reshapes everything around it. The house sounded different. The mornings felt heavier. The land itself seemed to change, as if it were mourning too, or perhaps just reflecting her back at herself. She kept the farm running. That was never in question. Mirabelle Oakes was not a woman who gave up. She hired a hand named Cutter, a quiet, reliable man in his 50s who'd worked neighboring spreads for decades. And between the two of them, they managed the cattle and the hay and the 1,000 small demands of 300 acres. But there was the horse. Doyle had bought him 8 months before he died. A black quarter horse named Rook, for years old and barely halter broke when they got him. Doyle had planned to train him himself, had talked about it like it was something to look forward to. I'll have that horse riding smooth by spring, he'd said. He'd said it in September. He was dead by October. For 3 years, Rook lived in the back pasture in a kind of uneasy truce with everyone on the property. He'd thrown Cutter twice. He'd thrown Truett once, during a visit, which had ended the conversation about Truett helping with the horse permanently. A neighbor named Gideon Pruitt had offered to buy him. Before he hurt somebody, Mirabelle and 2 other men from the county had come by at various points and left shaking their heads. The consensus was clear. Rook was dangerous, and Mirabelle should sell him or put him down. She did neither. She wasn't sure, in the beginning, why she held on. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't even fully conscious. But somewhere in the part of her that still felt Doyle's absence like a missing limb, she understood that the horse had been his last project, his last hope, and letting go of Rook felt, in some way she couldn't quite articulate, like letting go of something she wasn't ready to release. So the horse stayed, and the town watched, and the months turned into years. Until the morning, everything changed. It started with a book. Mirabelle had never been a reader of self-help. She preferred novels, the old kind, with long sentences and complicated people, and she had a mild but genuine contempt for anything with a subtitle that promised transformation. So when her neighbor Delphine showed up one afternoon with a paperback about natural horsemanship, Mirabelle almost didn't take it. "I'm not asking you to become a cowgirl," Delphine said, which was exactly the right thing to say. "I'm asking you to read 40 pages and see if any of it sounds like anything." Delphine was 71, lived alone since her husband had moved into memory care 2 years prior, and had the particular authority of a woman who had survived things without broadcasting them. Mirabelle respected her more than almost anyone she knew. She read the 40 pages that night. Then she read the rest of the book. It wasn't magic. It wasn't revelation. But there was something in the language of it that struck her. The idea that horses don't respond to force, not in any sustainable way. That trust has to be built in a specific sequence. Presence first, then patience, then communication, then partnership. You couldn't skip steps. You couldn't rush grief, the horses, or your own. She read that last part twice. The next morning, she did something she'd never done in 3 years of owning Rook. She went to the back pasture without a halter, without a lead rope, without any agenda at all. She sat down on the fence rail and watched him. Rook was beautiful in the way that wild or nearly wild things are beautiful. Something fundamentally untamed in his movement, even standing still. He was aware of her immediately. His ears swiveled. He kept his distance, which was 40 feet and constant. She sat there for 45 minutes. Then she went back inside. She did the same thing the next day. And the day after that, Cutter noticed. He didn't say anything at first. He was a man who understood that some processes don't benefit from commentary. But on the 4th morning, he brought her a cup of coffee without being asked and handed it over the fence like a small offering. "You got a plan?" he asked. "Not really," she said. He nodded like that was the most reasonable thing he'd heard in a while. The watching continued for 2 weeks. Rook's 40 feet became 35, then 30. He still wouldn't let her approach. The moment she stepped off the fence, he moved away, but the quality of his attention was changing. He was studying her the same way she was studying him. It was during the 3rd week that she found the other book. Not a new one. It had been on Doyle's nightstand when he died. She'd moved it without opening it, set it on the shelf in the spare room, and more or less forgotten it existed. She was looking for something else entirely when she found it. A slim volume with a cracked spine and Doyle's handwriting in the margins. She sat down on the floor of the spare room and read every note he'd made. He'd been preparing. He'd been studying. There were passages underlined about earning a horse's curiosity rather than commanding its compliance. There was a note in his handwriting. "This is the part one keep getting wrong with everything." Next to a paragraph about how the hardest part of building trust is learning to be comfortable with not yet. She cried for a long time. Then she got up and went back outside. Word got around, as it does in small places. Mirabelle Oaks was spending time in the back pasture with the horse that couldn't be ridden. People in Calverton didn't mean to be unkind, or most of them didn't, but they were watchers by nature, and they talked. The feed store had a particular kind of atmosphere that encouraged speculation, and Gideon Pruitt had a voice that carried. "She's going to get herself killed," he said, not once, but in the way that people repeat a statement until it becomes accepted fact. "That horse is wrong in the head. Always has been." Gideon was 67, had been farming horses since before Mirabelle arrived in Calverton, and had the specific confidence of a man who had never seriously been wrong about anything, or at least had never been forced to sit with the possibility. Mirabelle heard what was being said. Small towns don't hide their opinions well. She found she minded less than she expected to. There was a woman named Fable who worked at the county extension office and had known Mirabelle for 20 years, since the boys were small, and who stopped by one afternoon with a casserole and a look that said she was worried but didn't know how to say so. "People are talking," Fable said, setting the casserole on the counter. "I know. Gideon thinks you're going through something." "I am going through something," Mirabelle said. "I've been going through something for 3 years. That's not news." Fable looked at her for a long moment. "What do you think the horse is going to do for you?" It was an honest question, and Mirabelle gave it an honest answer. "I don't know yet," she said. "But Doyle believed in him, and I'm not ready to stop believing in things Doyle believed in." Fable didn't have a response for that. She left the casserole and drove away, and Mirabelle went back outside. By the 5th week, Rook would allow her to stand on the ground 10 feet away. Not approach, not yet, but stand. His body had changed in some subtle way that was hard to articulate. Less braced, less ready to flee. He would graze while she was present, which the book said was significant. An anxious horse doesn't graze. She started talking to him. Not commands, not training language, just talking. The way you talk to someone when you're not sure if they can hear you, but you need to say the things anyway. She told him about Doyle, about the way he laughed at his own jokes before he finished them, about how he'd always burned the toast, but insisted on making it anyway, about the September morning he'd brought Rook home in a borrowed trailer and stood in the pasture looking at the horse like he'd found something he'd been looking for without knowing it. Rook's ear turned toward her voice. She took that as something. There was a day in the 7th week when she reached out her hand, standing very still, and the horse walked to her. Not dramatically, not with any particular weight of meaning. Just walked over and touched his nose to her palm and stood there. She stood there too. She didn't move for a long time. When she went inside that evening, she called Truett in Memphis. "The horse let me touch him today," she said. There was a pause on his end. "Mom, are you sure you should be doing this?" "No," she said. "I'm not sure at all. That horse has hurt people. I know. Dad would have wanted you to be safe. Dad would have wanted me to finish what he started," she said. And she said it gently, without accusation, because she meant it that way. She found herself, somewhere around the 9th week, in the strange territory of becoming a different version of herself. It wasn't visible exactly. She looked the same. She ran the farm the same. She cooked the same food and called Truett on Sundays and went to the same church on the 1st and 3rd weekends of the month. But something was shifting in the deeper layers, in the places below behavior. Mirabelle had spent most of her adult life being good at things quietly. She was competent and steady and rarely asked for help and never made demands. These were qualities she'd thought of as virtues. She still thought of some of them that way. But the horse was teaching her, and she could only call it teaching, even knowing how strange that sounded, that there was a version of presence she'd never practiced. An attention without agenda. A patience that wasn't just waiting, but was itself a form of engagement. She had spent 3 years being strong for everyone around her. She hadn't let herself not know. And here was Rook, every morning, insisting that not knowing was the only honest place to begin. The riding lesson came about in a way she hadn't planned. A woman named Odile ran a small equestrian program outside of Calverton. Mostly kids, mostly beginner stuff, and Mirabelle had known her vaguely for years. Odile called out of nowhere one afternoon and said she'd heard what Mirabelle was doing with the horse, and if Mirabelle ever wanted to talk through the groundwork, she was welcome to come by. Mirabelle went. She went half a dozen times. She watched Odile work with horses that had problems, horses with fear histories, horses that had been handled roughly, horses like Rook, and she asked questions and took notes in the margin of a spiral notebook the way Doyle had taken notes in the margin of his book. "You're not trying to break him," Odile said one afternoon, watching Mirabelle describe what she'd been doing with Rook. "You're trying to have a conversation. Is that wrong?" "No," Odile said. "It's actually the only thing that works. Most people just don't have the patience for it. Or they have the patience, but not the willingness to not be in charge." She paused. "You're not fighting for control." "I gave up on control a while back," Mirabelle said. Odile smiled. "Grief will do that." Around the 12th week, Mirabelle put a saddle pad on Rook for the first time. Just the pad, no saddle. She'd been desensitizing him to touch for weeks by then, rubbing a lead rope along his neck and sides, letting him feel the weight of her hand in different places. He'd been accepting it, not happily, not at first, but with an increasing willingness that felt like trust rather than resignation. The pad took 3 sessions. The saddle took 2 more weeks. She brought Odile out on the day she tried the saddle for the first time, not because she was afraid, but because she understood by now that witnesses matter, that having someone present who can see what you're doing clearly, without the distortion of hope or fear, is a kind of gift. Rook turned and looked at the saddle. His nostrils flared. His ears went forward and then sideways and then forward again. And then he dropped his head and sighed. Odile made a sound beside her that might have been a laugh or might have been wonder. "Well," she said. "Well," Mirabelle agreed. Back in town, Gideon Pruitt was still talking. The word foolish came up frequently. A man named Alcott who ran the hardware store had started calling her the horse widow, not to her face, which said something. and there was a general sense among the men who gathered at the feed store that this would end badly and soon. Mirabelle kept going out every morning. Truett drove down from Memphis the weekend after Mirabelle first sat on Rook. She hadn't called to tell him specifically. She'd mentioned it in passing on their Sunday call, trying to keep her voice level. He'd driven 4 hours anyway. He pulled up on a Friday evening looking like a man who had rehearsed several speeches in the car and wasn't sure which one to give. She fed him dinner first. Then she told him everything. Not just about the horse. About Doyle's book. About sitting on the fence for weeks. About the morning Rook walked to her. About Odile and the saddle and the strange slow process of building something with an animal that had every reason not to trust. Truett listened. He was a listener, her older son, quieter than people expected, more careful. He had Doyle's eyes, pale gray with a quality of steadiness in them. "You sat on him?" he said. "Just for a few minutes. Cutter was right there. We didn't go anywhere. I just Saturday." She paused. He stood perfectly still. Truett was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you would have worried." "I'm worried now." "I know. But you drove 4 hours, and that means something to me. It means a lot." She reached across the table and put her hand on his. "I'm okay, Truett. I'm more okay than I've been in 3 years." He looked at her. She meant it, and he could tell. The next morning she took him out to the pasture and let him watch. Rook came to her without hesitation now. That was the part that still surprised her, every time. That casual offering of trust, and she stood with him, stroking along his neck, and she felt Truett's silence behind her change from worried to something else. "He's different," Truett said quietly. "He is. You're different." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. What she didn't tell Truett, because she was still working out how to say it, was what the horse had given back to her. It wasn't confidence exactly, though it was that too. It was something more specific. The understanding that you could be in the middle of grief and still be in the middle of growth. That loss and becoming could exist in the same season. That you didn't have to choose between honoring what was gone and building what came next. Doyle had left her the horse. The horse had left her something else entirely. There was a Sunday in the 13th week when she took Rook out of the pasture for the first time. Just a walk down the gravel track that ran along the south fence line, cut her alongside at a respectful distance, nobody saying anything. The morning was pale and cool. October again, the same month Doyle had died. She felt him beneath her, the rhythm of his walk, the warmth of him, the enormous and gentle aliveness. She felt the land under them both. 312 acres of memory, of other people's lives and her own, all of it still there. She thought, "I'm still here too." When she got back, she was crying. She wasn't sure when she'd started. Cutter didn't comment, which was the right call, and she slid down from the saddle and stood with her forehead against Rook's neck for a while, breathing. "Good boy," she said, to the horse, to herself, to Doyle, wherever he was, to all of it. The day it became a public event, the day the town of Calverton stopped being a backdrop and became an audience, was not one Mirabelle had planned. It was a Saturday in late October, 3 weeks after her first real ride. The county had its fall swap meet at the old fairgrounds on the edge of town, which meant half of Calverton was gathered in the same half-mile radius. It also meant that when Mirabelle rode Rook down the road that passed the fairgrounds on the way back from a longer trail she'd been testing, there were about 200 people to see it. She hadn't thought about the route, or perhaps somewhere below thought. She had chosen it without knowing why. She came around the bend in the road and the fairgrounds opened up on her left, the tents, the trailers, the smell of funnel cake and diesel, and she felt Rook's body register the noise, the crowd, the strangeness of it. His walk shortened. His ears went rigid. She felt the tension move through him like a current. She exhaled, long and slow. She moved her hand along his neck the way she'd learned to, the way that meant "I'm here. I know, we're okay." His walk didn't smooth out immediately, but he didn't bolt. He didn't rear. He kept moving, one foot after the other, trusting her despite the fear, which she understood was the only real definition of trust there was. People noticed, not all at once. It started at the edge of the crowd, the people who could see the road, and it spread the way attention spreads through a gathered group, a ripple of redirected focus. She heard her name. She heard the silence that replaced conversation. She kept riding. Gideon Pruitt was standing near the gate with 2 other men when she passed. She saw him. He saw her. He had the expression of a man encountering something that doesn't fit into the category where he'd stored it, and the recategorization was happening visibly, in real time. He said nothing. She rode past. There were people she recognized all along that stretch. Families she'd known for decades. Kids she'd watched grow up. Men who'd offered opinions about her horse and her future and her capacity to manage. She didn't look at any of them with triumph. She wasn't interested in triumph. What she was feeling was something quieter and more durable than triumph. It was Fable she saw at the far end, near the pie tables. Fable, who had brought the casserole and asked the honest question and left without an answer. Fable, who was watching now with her hand over her mouth and something in her eyes that might have been relief. Mirabelle pulled Rook to a stop. For a moment, nothing happened. Rook stood. The crowd, at least the part of it that was watching, held its collective breath in the particular way of people who aren't sure whether to clap or stay quiet. Then a girl, 7 or 8, small, in a yellow jacket, broke from the crowd and ran toward the horse with the fearlessness of someone too young to know she was supposed to be afraid. Her mother called her name, Wyla. Wait. But Wyla was already there, standing in front of Rook with her hands out, palm up, the way children sometimes know to do without being taught. Rook stretched his nose toward her. The crowd exhaled. Fable was crying. A few others too. And Mirabelle, sitting on Doyle's last project in Doyle's boots on a cool October morning, felt something in her chest open like a door she'd thought was sealed. She thought about the man who had shouted at her, "That horse don't care about your grief." She thought about how wrong he was, in the most specific way a person can be wrong. The horse had cared about nothing but grief for 3 years. Both of theirs. A horse no one had been patient enough for, and a woman no one thought had enough left to give. They had recognized each other. And then, because it felt right, because the moment asked for it, she did something she hadn't planned. She swung down from the saddle, stood in the road, and held Rook's lead rope loosely in her left hand. She looked at Fable. "You asked me what the horse was going to do for me," she said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Fable nodded. "I think I have an answer now." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The answer was visible. In her posture, in the horse standing calm beside her, in the October morning around them. The answer was that she had come through something. Not over it. Not past it. Through. Gideon Pruitt walked over eventually. It took him a few minutes, which was probably as fast as a man like him could manage. "That's the same horse," he said. It wasn't a question. "Same horse," she said. He looked at Rook for a long time. Then he looked at her. "You mind if I?" He reached out his hand, slowly, toward the horse's face. She stepped slightly aside to let him. Rook sniffed his hand and didn't move. Gideon Pruitt nodded slowly, the way men nod when they are admitting something without words. He patted the horse's cheek once, carefully, and walked away. She stood there for a little longer, letting people come if they wanted to, turning no one away. A few children, a few old women, a teenage boy who pretended to be casual about it, but looked at Rook with open, unguarded wonder. The swap meet went on around her. The funnel cake smell drifted. The October light fell long and golden over everything. She thought, Doyle would have loved this. She was sure he would have. She was also sure, in a way she couldn't have been 6 months ago, that loving a thing in memory and building something new in the present are not opposites. That you can carry someone with you without being stopped by the carrying. She mounted up again and rode home. November came in mild that year. The fields dried early, which meant the last of the hay could be cut before the cold settled, and Mirabelle and Cutter worked the days with a kind of quiet efficiency that had always been the rhythm of the farm, the rhythm she'd inherited from Doyle and made her own. Rook lived in the main barn now, which was different from the back pasture, closer to the house, closer to the activity of the day. He had opinions about this. He could be imperious about grain timing and demanded acknowledgement whenever Mirabelle walked through, which she gave readily. Truitt came back for Thanksgiving and brought his girlfriend, a practical, clear-eyed woman named Vesper who had grown up in Kentucky and knew horses and spent most of the first afternoon in the barn. Mirabelle liked her immediately. She liked even more what it did to Truitt, the way he watched Vesper with Rook, the ease of it, like something in him was recognizing something. Bodie called from Portland. It was a longer call than usual. He asked about the horse, which meant someone had told him, probably Truitt, and there was something different in his voice, a quality of attention that hadn't been there in a while. She told him about October, about the swap meet, about Wyla in her yellow jacket. She heard him get quiet on his end. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. Are you doing okay?" "I'm doing better than okay," she said. "I'm doing something. He said he might come for Christmas." She told him the guest room was always made up. Odile came out to the farm twice in November to watch Mirabelle ride, and what she said, both times, was nothing much, just observations, adjustments, small corrections. But on the second visit, before she left, she turned and said, "I want you to know that what you did with that horse is not normal. I want you to hear that clearly. Most people couldn't have done it, not because they're not capable, but because they won't sit still long enough to let the horse tell them what it needs." Mirabelle thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about patience as a skill rather than a personality trait, something you could learn or refuse to learn, something grief could teach you if you let it. Fable stopped by the week after Thanksgiving with a bottle of wine and no casserole, which felt like progress. They sat on the porch in the cool air and talked for 2 hours about Doyle, about the farm, about the horse, about getting older in a place that had known you so long it sometimes forgot to look at you clearly. Mirabelle said things she hadn't said to anyone. Fable said things she hadn't said to anyone either. When Fable left, Mirabelle sat alone on the porch for a while longer. The stars were out. The farm was quiet. From the barn, she could hear the particular soft sound of a horse moving in its stall, that large and comfortable aliveness. She thought, "This is mine. All of it. The grief and the land and the horse and the stars. All of it mine." The following spring, Mirabelle started something she hadn't planned. It grew out of a conversation with Odile, who had a waiting list of adults, mostly women, mostly in the second half of their lives, who wanted to learn to ride but felt embarrassed to join the children's beginner classes. There was a gap, Odile said, a population of people who needed something that wasn't quite being offered. Mirabelle had 312 acres and a horse who had learned to trust again. She didn't overthink it. They called it simply the Saturday program, and it ran from April through October, once a week. For participants at a time, no more. It wasn't about horsemanship primarily, or not only. It was about exactly what it sounded like: patience, presence, building something with a living creature that could not be forced or rushed. Odile brought 2 of her own horses on alternating weekends. Rook was part of it in a supporting role, not used for beginners, but visible, grazing in the field where participants could see him, occasionally allowed to approach. His reputation had shifted entirely. He was no longer the dangerous horse. He was something else, harder to name but easier to feel. The proof of something. The first cohort included a woman named Aldina who had recently retired and didn't know what to do with herself. A woman named Tessely who was in the middle of a divorce and needed somewhere her body could just be without her mind interfering. And a woman named Rosette who was 67 and had always been afraid of horses and had finally decided that being afraid of something for 67 years was long enough. Mirabelle watched Rosette approach a horse for the first time, tentative, breathing carefully, hands at her sides, and saw something in the woman's face that she recognized from her own reflection a year ago. The look of someone standing at the beginning of something they don't have words for yet. She didn't say anything. She stood nearby, the way Cutter had once stood nearby her, and she let the moment be what it was. The Saturday program filled every available spot in its first season. There were more women who wanted to come than she could accommodate. She expanded carefully, 1 extra session per month, then 2, without losing the quality of smallness that made it work. People didn't want a program. They wanted a place. She heard about a woman 2 counties over who was doing something similar, and they had lunch together and shared notes and talked for 4 hours about the things that don't get said in most conversations about what the second half of a life is supposed to look like, and whether the rules that govern the first half still apply, and how grief is really just love with nowhere to go, and how you have to give it somewhere to go. Calverton noticed the Saturday program the way it had noticed Mirabelle and Rook, slowly, then all at once. There was a piece in the county paper. Gideon Pruitt mentioned it at the feed store, apparently in positive terms, though Mirabelle heard this secondhand and chose to let it be accurate. She found herself thinking often about Wyla, the little girl in the yellow jacket who had run toward the horse without fear. She didn't know the family well, but she learned the child had started riding lessons with Odile. She found that satisfying in the specific way that things are satisfying when they complete a loop you didn't know you'd started. Bodie came for Christmas. He came for spring too, and brought someone, a quiet, thoughtful man named Stellan, and Mirabelle watched her younger son on the land where he'd grown up and saw something settle in him that had been restless for a long time. He didn't say he was thinking about coming back. He didn't have to. She rode Rook every morning that summer. Not long rides, not dramatic ones, down the south fence line, across the hay field, back along the creek that flooded every March without fail. The land she knew by feel more than sight, the land that held everyone she'd loved. She wrote it, and she was on it, and they were the same thing, her and the horse and the place and the ongoing fact of being alive in it. This was not the life she had planned. She had planned a different life, one with Doyle in it, growing old in the particular comfort of a long partnership, the land passing eventually to the boys or to whoever would carry it. That life had been taken from her on a Tuesday in October, suddenly and without warning. But this life, the one she had made from the pieces of that loss, was real, was hers, she had come to understand, entirely enough, more than enough. It was the kind of life that made people ask, how? And the answer, always, was the same. You sit on the fence. You wait. You let the thing that's afraid of you understand that you're not a threat. And then one morning, in its own time, it walks to you. That's all. That's the whole of it. I'll be honest with you. I've told a lot of stories, but the ones that stay with me, the ones that I keep coming back to, are always about exactly this. The ordinary, stubborn, unglamorous decision to keep going when you have every reason not to. Mirabelle didn't make headlines. She didn't go on a talk show. She rode a horse down a country road in October, and a little girl in a yellow jacket ran toward it without being afraid. And that was the moment. That was the whole story. Sometimes the thing you're fighting isn't an enemy. It's just time, and patience, and the willingness to not be in charge. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the widow with the borrowed boots, or the horse that didn't trust anymore, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you're still fighting for. Like this video if Mirabelle earned it. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Because there are more. There are always more. And they're always true in the ways that matter.